I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off. And I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows in one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser and I just noticed movement out the corner of my eye and looked down there. There was. And honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it 17 years later. A black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape. But the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, just like, Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream. Nothing. I was just frozen because it just fucking came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on it. I screamed. I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went the fuck outside, into the daylight, and didn't go back in until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something. I don't know what it was. My house was built in 1904. It is a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement. But the tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall, into the living room, and out into the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back. Now the basement is not clean, with full sight lines. There had been partitions made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he is about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye he sees it. It is a shadowy figure, right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He basically just told it, hey, fuck you, I don't have time for this shit. My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend laden truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So, then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" The ambulance company that I used to work for had a haunted ambulance. Rig 12. A lot of EMTs had stories about it, but I never put much stock in paranormal stuff. That is, until I had my own experience with Rig 12. My partner and I were working in a rural community at 3A. And it was pitch dark and completely quiet. We were both dozing. I was in the driver's seat and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice, but I thought my partner was talking. I told her I was trying to sleep and closed my eyes. I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" Followed by a few seconds of heavy breathing. My partner and I sat up straight and looked back into the patient compartment, where it sounded like the voice had come from. Things were quiet for a couple of seconds. Then we heard the click of an oxygen bottle regulator and a hiss, as if it was leaking. I turned on the lights, and we ran out of the rig. I thought a transient might have climbed in while we were asleep, so we opened the rear doors. No one was there. I checked the oxygen bottles. Neither was opened. We didn't sleep much after that. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that. But he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house, and as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he has been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. When my daughter was like 3-ish, she always slept in the pitch black. No TV on for light, no nightlight, nothing. One night when putting her to bed, she said, "Mommy, make sure the curtain is closed. I don't like to see Daddy's shadow walk around the room." She wanted the room so dark so she couldn't see the shadow. This freaked me out. Her dad never goes in her room at night, and he's the only man in the house. That room's closet always freaked me out. Like I would get a vibe that I was being stared out by a guy in a military uniform. Then one day we went into the attic to store winter clothes away and found an old army duffel bag filled with some guy's military stuff. Really freaked me out. We moved not long after that. One night when I was 10, I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, followed by someone sitting on my bed. I felt my leg grazed and the bed sink under a person's weight. It's just Mom, I thought, and I opened my eyes. It was not my mom. I found an eyeless boy. He had black, empty sockets, about my age, sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand, and in it was a little box. I was startled, but reached out. He pulled back. I reached again and said, "Give it." Then I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes, he was gone. But I could still see the imprint where he'd sat on my bed. Fast forward 5 years. My girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, she took a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at a corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again. She came to full consciousness, and I explained what she'd done. She looked haunted. Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there, in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me. Freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years. I was with the same girlfriend, and we had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house, in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd talk. After a while, I noticed she had almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once whom she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. One of the nation's most infamously haunted locations, the Stanley Hotel, is located in a remote area, only 70 miles from bustling downtown Denver, Colorado. Many have heard of it as it inspired Stephen King's blockbuster horror novel, The Shining. In October 1974, Stephen King and his wife, Tabitha King, decided to take a trip from their home in Boulder to the adjacent resort town of Estes Park. They reserved a room at the Stanley Hotel only a few days before it closed for the winter. Who knew room 217 would soon become the inspiration for one of Stephen King's most well-known books, which would subsequently be adapted by Stanley Kubrick into one of the most talked about horror movies of the century. It all began with a nightmare in which King, helpless, watched as his little son was chased through the Stanley Hotel's hallway by a huge fire hose. The fire hose would ultimately triumph, wrapping itself around King's son like a giant snake and devouring him whole. King would awaken in a pool of his own sweat, running to his hotel window for a cigarette to calm his nerves down. Just a few years before The Shining would be finished, he would get the first inspiration for it there, gazing out into the solitude of the Colorado wilderness. According to witness accounts, a terrible event in room 217 during the hotel's formative years served as an early warning of the murky past that would accompany the Stanley Hotel for the remainder of its existence. One late night, as a snowstorm was approaching, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Elizabeth Wilson, was going around the hotel, igniting lanterns in case of a power loss. Meanwhile, the second floor was gradually saturating with combustible gas from a leak. An explosion rocked the hotel as Wilson entered room 217 and lit a match. The blast destroyed the room, the hallway, and the floor, plunging her into the dining area below. Surprisingly, Mrs. Wilson survived and recounted the story until the day she passed. However, many believe that Miss Wilson's ghost is still present in the room, which caused her so much trauma. Guests in room 217 have long reported seeing somebody move furniture around or turn on and off lights. Some unmarried couples claim that a cold force trapped between their sleeping bodies is evidence that Mrs. Wilson is still present. The creepy, old-fashioned porcelain doll with a Victorian appearance, red lips, rosy cheeks, and blue eyes, referring to Annabelle, may come to mind when one thinks of a haunted doll. However, it's unlikely that anyone still keeps one in their house, unless that house is Warren's Occult Museum in Monroe. However, those dolls are not the only ones getting possessed. Disney's Frozen Elsa doll, given as a Christmas 2013 gift in the Houston region, made headlines when it appeared to start acting paranormal. For 2 years, the doll was working as it was technically supposed to, reciting phrases from the movie and singing "Let It Go" when a button was pressed. In 2015, it started randomly alternating between English and Spanish languages. The woman who purchased the doll claimed that, even with its switch off, the doll would start speaking and singing randomly. In December 2019, the family chose to get rid of the Elsa doll. Despite tossing it in the garbage, the family eventually discovered it hidden inside a bench in their living room weeks later. Following the discovery, Elsa started to speak and sing solely in Spanish, soon after which the family made another attempt to scrap the Elsa doll. The doll was double-bagged and put at the bottom of the garbage can, which was soon picked up by waste collectors. The family left for a trip sometime later, but when they were back, the haunted doll was waiting in their backyard. In their last attempt, the family sent Elsa through the mail to a Minnesotan family friend, who fastened the possessed doll to the front bumper of his truck. According to the woman's most recent update in October 2020, the doll hasn't returned to Houston. Yet. One night, when I was maybe 10, 12, I had trouble falling asleep. My bedroom was the entire top floor of our house, with my bed and such being on the left side and storage closets and a play area being on the right. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise from the other side of the room and see a rocking horse begin to rock. It was sitting just outside one of the storage closet doors. It proceeded to rock its way halfway across the room and stopped dead under the ceiling light. At this point, I was freaking out and just buried my head under my blankets and never peeked out again until morning. It was all confirmed to not be a dream, as the rocking horse was still in the middle of my room when I woke up. Furthermore, I got a stern reprimand from my parents for being up out of bed playing with my toys well past my bedtime. Their bedroom was directly below the storage closet play area and had heard the creaking of the rocking horse shuffling across the room. I was 12, moving from O to My with my family. We are moving into a townhouse. My mother went to go get the keys from the leasing office, and my siblings and I stayed outside of the townhouse waiting for her. I decided to go up to the front door and play with the doorbell and knock on the door a lot. I wasn't expecting any trouble because no one was in there. However, after doing it a bunch of times, the door started to open, reminding you, this is the door that was supposedly empty and locked. Hence, why my mother went to go get the key in the first place. The door opened and I saw an old white man looking down at me. He never said anything. He looked extremely peeved. His facial expression did not change. He had the most wrinkles I've ever seen on someone's face, and he looked extremely unhappy, annoyed. Ironically, he was dressed like Mr. Rogers, green sweater, vest, and khakis. I looked up at him and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know anybody lived here." After I said that to him, he closed the door. My mother returned a few minutes later with the key. My siblings and I all went up to her panicking. I remember the first thing we did was yell, "Mama, Mama, Mama." When we saw her come back, we told her what happened. My mother had a look of fear on her face. Me and my siblings walked behind her as she walked up to the door. After she unlocked the door, we saw that the inside was empty. There was no old man. My neighbor Diane and I had a playful poltergeist for years, and we called it Billy. I'd come home and find something put in a weird place. Milk in a cupboard, toilet paper in the fridge, laundry detergent in the bathtub. Diane once called to ask if Billy had been around because she couldn't find a gallon of milk. We finally found it outside on her back steps. And sugar. Darn sugar. Every morning, my sugar bowl was empty. When I'd had enough, I would point to Diane's home and yell, "Go see Diane!" Within 5 minutes, I'd get a call from her. "Thanks a lot," she'd say. He'd gone and pulled shenanigans at her place. This occurred for the entire 2 years we lived there. No one believed us, not even our husbands. My mother thought someone was stealing from us when we were sleeping or out of the house. My sister believed something was going on but didn't know what. I still can't explain any of it. On July 7, 1905, Katie DeWitt James, then 29, and her 1-year-old daughter Lulu Bell boarded a train to visit her cousin. Several weeks passed and there was no sight of Katie or her daughter. Her father hired private investigator Sam Bartell to find his daughter and granddaughter, and what the PI found was disturbing. Instead of getting off where she was supposed to meet her cousin, Katie got off the train at Weatherford with a notorious prostitute, Fanny Norton. Witnesses claimed to have seen Norton take Katie and the baby for a short trip in the area near Deer Creek before returning with just the child, whom she abandoned at a farm before running away. When Bartell finally located Norton, she was brought into custody but soon poisoned herself. Sometime later, The following August, a father who was fishing with his son near Deer Creek discovered the skeleton under a wooden wagon crossing. The skeleton was fully dressed. The skull was found 3 feet away with a bullet just behind the right ear. 38 caliber revolver was also discovered nearby. It was concluded that the body belonged to Katie DeWitt James. It was left there after Norton slayed her the month beforehand. 80 years later, the wooden crossing was demolished, and a concrete bridge was built instead. It was promptly given the tragic moniker of Dead Woman's Crossing. People have claimed to have seen Katie as a blue light floating throughout the town and have heard a woman's voice searching for her kid and the sound of rolling wheels.